83 seconds. That is less time than it takes to tie your combat boots. In that span of time, most soldiers under fire are just trying to find cover. But for Lieutenant Amelia Clare, 83 seconds was an eternity. It was the exact amount of time it took for her to rewrite the rules of engagement, unarmed and outnumbered. They told her she was a liability. They stripped her of her primary weapon. They thought they were protecting the mission. They were wrong. They weren't protecting the mission from her. They should have been protecting the enemy. The wind cut through the Kandahar Valley like a serrated knife, but the air inside the briefing room at Forward Operating Base, Copperhead, was colder. The year was 2018. The unit was a Tier 1 task force, a shade of black operations that officially didn't exist. Among the bearded, hulking figures of seasoned operators sat Lieutenant Amelia Valkyrie Clare. She wasn't just the only woman in the room. She was the subject of an experiment that half the command staff wanted to see fail. Amelia had passed the selection. She had endured the torture, the hypothermia, and the hell week that broke Olympic athletes. But to Major Sterling, the commanding officer of Alpha Platoon, she was a political stunt, a box to be checked. "Eyes front!" Sterling barked, slapping a satellite photo onto the table. "Target is a compound in the Upper Petch Valley. High-altitude extraction. We have intel on a courier moving hard drives containing localized cell sleeper locations." Sterling looked around the room, his gaze landing heavily on Amelia. He was a man of the old school, square-jawed, scars on his neck, and a belief that biology was destiny. "This is a speed run," Sterling continued. "Fast rope in, secure the intel, exfil. Every ounce counts. We are cutting weight." Amelia adjusted her gear. She was the team's designate marksman. Her SR-25 sniper rifle was an extension of her body. She had logged top-tier scores at the range, outshooting men who had been in the teams for a decade. "Claire," Sterling said. The room went silent. "Sir?" Amelia's voice was steady, void of emotion. "You're on intel duty. Once we breach, you secure the documents and the prisoner. Nothing else." "Understood, sir. I'll pack the SR-25 short barrel for CQC. Close quarters combat," she replied. Sterling shook his head, a tight, patronizing smile playing on his lips. "Negative. I said we're cutting weight. That rifle is 12 pounds with the optic and mag. You're going to be hauling 40 pounds of sensitive site exploitation gear and potential evidence. You'll slow us down on the ascent." The silence in the room thickened. Private First Class Miller, a young, eager operator from Ohio who respected Amelia, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He knew, like everyone else, that stripping a SEAL of their primary weapon before a raid was unheard of. "Sir," Amelia said, her jaw tightening. "With respect, I am the most qualified marksman for the Overwatch. If we take contact, you have 8 pipe hitters around you to handle it," Sterling cut her off, his voice sharp. "You carry a sidearm and the intel kit. That's an order, Lieutenant. Leave the rifle in the armory. Don't try to be a hero. Just be a mule." Amelia held his gaze. In the military, you don't fight the rank, you fight the enemy. But this felt personal. It was a neutering. He was taking away her claws before throwing her into the lion's den. "Copy that, sir," Amelia whispered. Later, in the hangar, PFC Miller walked up to her as she was loading her Sig Sauer PU-226 magazines. "He's wrong, you know," Miller said quietly, checking his own M4. "You outshot me by 6 points last week. I'd feel better if you had the long gun." Amelia looked at the young private. Miller was a good kid, 22 years old with a fiancée back in Cleveland. He believed in the badge, not the politics. "Doesn't matter what he thinks, Miller," Amelia said, holstering her pistol. "Just keep your head on a swivel. I've got your 6, even with a pea shooter." She didn't know it then, but that pistol and her own 2 hands were about to become the only things standing between Miller and a body bag. The infiltration was textbook. The Black Hawks ran dark, dropping the team 2 clicks south of the target compound. The terrain was brutal, jagged shale and ice that crunched loudly under night vision goggles. Major Sterling took point, moving with the aggression of a man who wanted to be done by breakfast. Amelia brought up the rear, the heavy SSE, sensitive site exploitation, backpack digging into her shoulders. Without the weight of her rifle in her hands, she felt off balance, phantom limbs itching for a polymer grip that wasn't there. They reached the compound at 0200 hours. It was a mud brick fortress perched on a cliff edge. "Breach in 3, 2, 1, Sterling whispered over the comms. The explosion shattered the silence. The wooden door splintered, and the team flooded into the courtyard. For the first 2 minutes, it went according to plan. Flashbangs detonated. Shouts of "Clear!" echoed through the lower levels. Amelia moved into the main room, her pistol drawn, scanning for the documents. She found the courier's bag under a table. "Jackpot," she radioed. "I have the package." "Copy, Claire. Get it and get out," Sterling replied. Then the world disintegrated. It wasn't a skirmish. It was a setup. The intel hadn't just been wrong. It had been fed to them. High above, on the ridges overlooking the compound, muzzle flashes sparkled like paparazzi cameras. Heavy machine gun fire, PKM rounds, rained down into the courtyard. "Contact! High ground! Multiple positions!" Miller screamed over the net. RPG fire slammed into the west wall, burying 3 operators under rubble. The team was trapped in a bowl, taking fire from 3 sides. "Pull back to the main structure!" Sterling roared. Amelia grabbed Miller by the vest and dragged him inside the main building, just as 7.622 rounds chewed up the dirt where he had been standing. Inside the mud brick room, the situation was catastrophic. Sterling was bleeding from a shrapnel wound to the thigh. The team's heavy gunner was unconscious. They were pinned down, and the enemy wasn't staying on the ridges. They were coming down. "They're breaching the perimeter!" Miller yelled, firing blindly out the window. "I count 10, 15 squirters moving to the door." Sterling tried to stand, but collapsed. He looked at Amelia. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man realizing his command was about to be wiped out. "Claire," Sterling gasped. "Suppression. We need suppression." "I don't have a rifle, sir," Amelia shouted over the deafening roar of incoming fire. "Then do something." The back door of the safe house, a heavy oak slab, began to shudder. They were coming in from the rear, flanking the team. The operators were focused on the front windows. No one was covering the back. Amelia looked at her SIG P226. 15 rounds in the mag. 1 in the chamber. She looked at Miller, whose eyes were wide with terror. She looked at Sterling, who was fumbling with a tourniquet. If the enemy breached that back door, they would enfilade the room. Everyone would die. Amelia dropped the heavy intel bag. She didn't need orders anymore. The soldier in her, the SEAL, took over. "Watch the front," she told Miller. "I've got the back." She moved into the narrow hallway connecting the main room to the rear entrance. It was a fatal funnel. Tight, dark, and about to be filled with violence. She took a deep breath, centering her heart rate. The door hinges screamed. The wood splintered. The door didn't just open, it was kicked off its hinges. Elosenausta 005. The first insurgent rushed through the dust, an AK-47 raised high. He expected fear. He expected a spray of panic fire. He didn't expect Amelia. She didn't shoot. She stepped into his space. As the barrel of his rifle came up, she slapped it aside with her left hand, stepping inside his guard. It was a move from the Filipino martial art of Kaylee. fluid and brutal. With her right hand, she drove the muzzle of her pistol into his throat, not firing, but using the steel weapon as a blunt instrument. As he gagged, stumbling back, she fired once, a controlled shot, under the chin, up into the brainstem. The man dropped without a sound. 006, 0.18. Two more men surged in behind him, stepping over the body. Amelia dropped to a knee, making herself a small target. She double-tapped the man on the left, 2 shots to the chest plate. He staggered but didn't fall. He was wearing body armor. Amelia adjusted instantly. The Mozambique drill. 2 to the body, 1 to the head. Bang! The 3rd shot caught him in the ocular cavity. He crumpled. The 3rd man, a giant with a beard dyed with henna, swung a machete, closing the distance too fast for her to aim. He knocked the pistol from her hand. It skittered across the stone floor. Amelia was unarmed. The giant roared and swung the blade down. Amelia caught his wrist mid-swing, the impact vibrating through her bones. She pivoted, using his momentum against him, hip-tossing the 200-pound man into the mud wall. Before he could recover, she grabbed the combat knife from her vest, a 4-inch blade she had sharpened herself. She didn't slash. She plunged it into the soft tissue between his neck and shoulder, severing the brachial artery. He fell, clutching his neck. 0.9, 0.50. Amelia scrambled for her pistol, but the hallway was filling with smoke and shouting. A 4th fighter appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by the burning courtyard. He raised his rifle. Amelia was on the ground. She couldn't reach her gun. She looked to her right. The first dead insurgent lay there, his AK-47 across his chest. Amelia rolled. Bullets chewed up the floorboards where she had just been. She grabbed the enemy's AK-47. It was heavy, rusted, and smelled of old oil. She rolled onto her back, bringing the weapon up. She didn't aim with sights, she aimed with instinct. She pulled the trigger. Click, a jam. The Russian weapon had failed. The 4th man was smiling now. He had her dead to rights. He walked closer for the execution shot. Amelia didn't freeze. She hurled the jammed rifle at his face with a primal scream. The heavy wood stock smashed into his nose, blinding him for a split second. In that second, Amelia lunged. She didn't go for a weapon. She went for him. She tackled him, driving him into the ground. They grappled in the dust. He was strong, but she was desperate. She found the grenade on his tactical vest. She yanked the pin. She kicked him away, scrambling backward into the alcove of the hallway. The man realized what had happened a second too late. Boom! The hallway shook. Dust rained down. 051, 123. Silence. Ringing ears. Amelia coughed, waving away the smoke. She stood up, her uniform torn, blood, mostly not hers, soaking her sleeve. She retrieved her SIG P226 from the floor. 1 man left, the leader of the breach team. He stepped through the smoke, stepping over the shattered remains of the 4th man. He saw Amelia, a woman, battered, holding a pistol. He hesitated. That hesitation was his death sentence. He raised his weapon, but Amelia was already moving. She flowed like water. She didn't retreat. She closed the distance. Pop, pop, 2 shots to his chest. He fell to his knees, still trying to raise his gun. Amelia walked up to him. She didn't say a cool movie line. She didn't gloat. She simply put 1 final round into his forehead to ensure the threat was neutralized. She checked her watch. 83 seconds had passed since the door was kicked in. 5 men lay dead in the hallway. Clear, she whispered into her comms, her voice cracking. Rear is clear. The silence that follows a firefight is heavy, a physical weight that presses against the eardrums more painfully than the explosions themselves. For the next 10 minutes, the only sound in the compound was the ragged breathing of the survivors and the distant, growing thrum of rotors cutting through the Afghan night. Miller and the surviving operators established a defensive perimeter, their weapons trained on the ridge lines, but the enemy had shattered. The A-10 Warthogs had done their work, turning the mountain passes into a graveyard of smouldering rock. The threat was gone, but the adrenaline was still poisoning their blood, making hands shake and hearts hammer against rib cages. Amelia stood by the rear door, the threshold of her 83-second war. She wasn't looking at the bodies piled in the hallway. She was looking past them, staring into the middle distance. Her hands were covered in grime and drying blood. Some of it the enemy's, some of it from the scrapes and cuts of close quarters grappling. She felt lightheaded, the inevitable crash of the sympathetic nervous system taking hold. "Angel 1 inbound," the radio crackled. "LZ is hot. Pop smoke." Green smoke hissed into the courtyard, casting a ghostly emerald light over the battered team. The extraction helicopter, a hulking MH-60 Black Hawk, flared its nose and touched down, the rotor wash kicking up a blinding storm of dust and debris. "Move, move!" the crew chief screamed, waving them in. They moved with the desperate urgency of men who knew their luck had run out. Miller and Amelia grabbed the handles of Major Sterling's litter. The commander was conscious but pale, his leg tourniqueted high on the thigh, his uniform soaked in dark blood. He gritted his teeth, suppressing a scream as they hoisted him into the belly of the bird. As the helicopter lifted off, banking hard to the west, the bay doors slid shut, sealing them inside the red-lit tactical womb. The noise was deafening, the whine of the turbine, the chatter of the pilots. But inside the cabin, the mood was somber. It was the feeling of surviving a car crash. Nobody celebrates immediately. You just check to see if you're still whole. Amelia slumped onto the canvas bench seat opposite Sterling. She leaned her head back against the vibrating fuselage, closing her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she found Miller staring at her. The young private looked terrified, not of the enemy, but of what he had just seen her do. He looked at her empty holster. He looked at the captured, jammed AK-47 she had slung over her shoulder as a desperate backup. He looked at the knife she was wiping on her pant leg. "Lieutenant," Miller whispered, his voice barely audible over the comms. "That hallway. I checked it before we left. There were 5 of them." Amelia didn't answer. She just nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Major Sterling shifted on the stretcher, groaning as the morphine took the edge off his agony. He turned his head, his eyes glassy but focused. He looked at his team. They were battered, dusty, and alive, and then his gaze landed on Amelia. He saw the intel-only patch on her shoulder, now ripped and hanging by a thread. The patch was a symbol of the box he had tried to put her in. He had treated her like luggage, a burden to be carried up the mountain. Instead, she had been the anchor that held them to the earth when the storm tried to blow them away. "Claire," Sterling's voice croaked over the internal headset. It was weak, stripped of the barking authority he usually wielded. Amelia straightened up, instinct taking over. "Sir, medics will have you stabilized in 20 mics. Just hang on." "I'm not talking about the leg," Sterling wheezed. He pulled himself up on one elbow, fighting the pain. "Miller said the rear fell. He said they breached the fatal funnel." "They did, sir," Amelia replied, her voice flat. "And you stopped them?" "I neutralized the threat, sir." Sterling looked at her hands. They were empty. No rifle. Just the raw tools of violence. He looked at the heavy SSE bag she was still wearing, the 40 pounds of gear he had ordered her to carry instead of a weapon. "With what, Claire?" Sterling asked, the question hanging in the red air. "I took your rifle. I left you defenseless." Amelia met his gaze. There was no anger in her eyes, only a cold, professional clarity. "You took my rifle, Major. You didn't take my training, and you can't take the SEAL out of the fight." The cabin went silent, save for the mechanical whine of the flight. The other operators, men who had smirked at her in the briefing room, were now looking at the floor or out the windows, avoiding her gaze out of sheer respect. They realized that while they were suppressing fire with thousands of dollars of optics and ammunition, she had been fighting hand to hand in the dark, fighting for their lives. Sterling closed his eyes, letting out a long, shuddering breath. The arrogance that had defined him at the briefing was gone, bled out on the floor of that mud-brick compound. "I was wrong," Sterling whispered. He opened his eyes, locking onto hers with intense seriousness. "I endangered this mission. I endangered this team. Because I didn't see a soldier. I saw a statistic." He reached down to his tactical belt with a trembling hand. Slowly, painfully, he unclipped his sidearm, a custom Sig Sauer P236 with a threaded barrel and reflex sight. It was his personal weapon, a symbol of his command. He held it out toward her, handle first. "You don't carry the bags anymore, Claire," Sterling said, his voice firming up. "From now on, you carry whatever the hell you want. You want a sniper rifle? You take it. You want a heavy machine gun? Miller will carry the ammo for you. But you are never unarmed again. Not on my watch." Amelia hesitated, then reached out and took the weapon. It was warm from his body heat. It was heavy. It was a peace offering and an admission of total defeat in their personal war. "Thank you, Major," she said quietly. "But keep the pistol. I prefer the SR-25. It has better range." A ripple of laughter went through the cabin, nervous, relieved laughter. Miller grinned, the tension breaking. "I think she earned the long gun, sir." "Yeah." Sterling laid his head back, a faint smile touching his lips. "She earned it." The return to Forward Operating Base Copperhead was a blur of medical teams and debriefings. But the true shift happened 2 days later in the sensory room. The entire task force, including the base commander, stood around a bank of monitors. They were watching the footage from Miller's helmet cam. The video was grainy and green, but the audio was clear. The scream of the hinges, the chaos, and then the camera panning to the hallway after the smoke cleared. The silence in the debriefing room was absolute as they counted the bodies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 83 seconds. The base commander turned to look at Amelia, who was standing in the back of the room, arms crossed, wearing fresh fatigues. "You did that?" the commander said, pointing at the screen, "with a knife and a jammed AK." "I improvised, sir," Amelia said. The story didn't stay in that room. It leaked out, as these stories always do, flowing through the chow halls and the gyms, passing from unit to unit. They stopped calling her the female SEAL. That qualifier disappeared. 6 months later, Amelia was walking through the mess hall at Bagram Airfield. The noise of clattering trays and loud conversations filled the air. As she walked down the center aisle, a group of rangers fell silent. Then a table of Green Berets. Heads turned, eyes followed her. It wasn't the look of men checking out a woman. It was the look of warriors recognizing a predator. A young private, fresh from the States, nudged his sergeant. "Sarge," he whispered, pointing. "Is that her? The one from the briefing?" The sergeant looked up, saw Amelia, and immediately straightened his posture. "Put your hand down, Boot," the sergeant hissed. "That's Valkyrie. She dropped a squad in less time than it takes you to piss, and she did it without a rifle." Amelia heard them. She didn't slow down. She didn't smile. She walked out into the bright Afghan sunlight, her hand resting subconsciously on the grip of her SR-25 sniper rifle. It was slung across her back, heavy, black, and deadly. They had tried to take her rifle to make her harmless. They had failed. They had only proven that the steel wasn't in the gun. It was in the spine of the woman holding it, and she would never let them forget it. Amelia Clare proved that it's not the gear that makes the operator. It's the heart. When the odds are 10 to 1 and you're stripped of everything, that is when you find out who you really are. What would you do in those 83 seconds? Freeze or fight? If this story fired you up, do us a favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. We post new military stories every week. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that the weapon isn't the gun, it's the warrior. Stay dangerous.